Hello and welcome once again to Android Developer Office Hours. My name is Joe Mallon. I have with me today DevRel people Alexander Lucas, Rado Meyer, Trevor Johns, and from Google Engineering, screwed up his first
Francesco Nerieri.
Thank you, Francesco. So the first thing we want to do is start out with a little intro from Francesco about Google Cloud Messaging, which is a new service that we introduced at Google I/O. Go ahead.
Hi everyone. Google Cloud Messaging is a new service which is an evolution from the old C2DM service, which allows you to send messages from the cloud to the device. This is an important service if you want to avoid polling, which saves battery life because your application doesn't have to wake up the radio every X seconds or minutes due to polling. But when the data is available on the cloud, then the server can send it down to the device. The improvement regards scalability, performance, and there is a new set of features or APIs that allows you to send multicast messages. So with one request, you can send up to 1,000 messages, up to one message to up to 1,000 different devices. Time to leave, so your messages can expire, and so on and so forth. A bit more other APIs.
Please send in or call in your questions. With that, we'll start now with questions from moderator. The first question is, why doesn't Google provide developers with more stats for the downloads, such as how users found the app, keywords, categories, related apps, etc.?
All right.
Okay, thank you, Trevor. Next question, also about Google Play. How come selling apps on Google Play is still impossible for most of the world because of country limitations? Why is Google being so opaque on this matter?
Okay. We definitely do want to try and offer Google Play both for downloads and as well for publishing in as many regions as possible. But different countries have different legal climates, and in some places it's a bit easier for us to go and open up shop than it is for others. So we definitely do want to go and to expand again to as many regions as possible. It just takes us a bit longer in some places compared to others. It would take a very long time to go and explain what these issues are for each country. So just in general, we're working on it. We're trying to get there as fast as possible.
Great. Thank you again, Trevor. Here is a GCM question. GCM servers allow for a maximum of 4 different collapse keys. Suppose the server's already received and stored messages with 4 different collapse keys. What happens with the next message if its collapse key is not among those 4?
Okay, so the collapse key concept comes from C2DM, where every single message needed to specify one collapse key. The limit of 4 was to avoid people to use infinite collapse keys to flood the devices. So we picked up 4, which means that you have 4 main topics for which you can update your device with messages. With GCM, we introduced a non-collapsible message, so you don't have to specify the collapse key. So if you need to send a big number of messages, even if the device is offline, you can use that particular one. It's important to note that it shouldn't be used for messages that you do want to collapse, like saying the same news as the very same update, because we will deliver all those messages down. So you can still use these 4 collapse keys. Now we are thinking that this restriction for GCM doesn't make much sense anymore, so we might consider to increase the number of collapse keys. But to answer the question, what happens is that you should not use more than 4 because the results is not definite. So if you send messages with 6 different collapse keys and device is offline, 4 of those messages will make the device, and you're not guaranteed which one of those 4.
Great. Thank you very much, Francesco. Next question about GCM. I read somewhere that GCM makes no guarantees regarding the time to delivery or order of delivery of GCM messages. Okay, but could you give us a rough estimate or target? Any plans to provide stats once the system is running smoothly?
Okay, one question at a time. The time of delivery. We do not guarantee time of delivery for multiple reasons. One is that we have no idea if the device is offline or online when we receive your message. So if the device is offline, we just store it and deliver it when it comes back online. Two, we have no say on the latency introduced by, for example, the mobile network between our server and the device. The numbers I gave at the speech when I had the speech at I/O was that roughly we take 95 milliseconds to process a message, and this is the time the GCM takes from the moment it receives the message to the moment in which it sends to the device. Other part of the question.
So the short answer there is it's close to immediate.
Yes, it is.
Unless there's extenuating circumstances.
I would say in the best possible case, it's nearly immediate. But the estimate or target, a lot of it depends on what's going on, whether the device is offline or online.
Correct. But also, like, if your server sends a message when in Germany, right, and the user that receives the message is somewhere else in the world, like in Taiwan, we have quite a bit of routing to do from that side of the world to the other one. So the latency can go up to 150 milliseconds or milliseconds. But it's definitely, if the device is connected, it's way below 1 second.
Right.
For us to deliver. And the other part was the order of messages. The way we send messages downstream is when we receive a message, we store it, unless the time to live is 0. In that case, we just send it down directly. But if we store a message and a second one comes, we deliver in that order. But network from your servers to our servers does not guarantee that if you send 2 messages in the same milliseconds that we will receive it in that exact order. So if we receive them swapped, then we will deliver them swapped.
So does that mean that it's guaranteed that we're sending them in order?
In the order in which we receive them.
Okay.
Right. That may not be the order in which you sent them to our servers.
Correct. Especially if you have a farm of servers
Right.
that sends messages at the very same time.
Yeah.
Depends on the network location.
I think, and the last question was, do we plan to provide stats on our...
So we launched the version 1 of Stats. If you, as a developer, log in the Android Developer Console, you can see stats for GCM and C2DM applications. We provide metrics of how many messages have been sent, how many are stored, collapsed, or throttled, if you had any errors in the request, and also metrics for the registrations that the user's device are connecting to our servers for your application. You can already see those, and we are in the working for providing a version 2 in which you will be able to query the life of a message.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you.
Just before we go to the next question, we're getting a little bit of interference from the 2 lavalier mics. So if you guys maybe want to turn those off and just share the handhelds with the guys next to you.
All right.
Okay.
I guess we will have to do that.
Actually, I guess we didn't have to turn those off. We could just muted them too. But yes,
True,
we do have to
but-
share mics now.
Right. So that's why I have this yellow thing in front of my face. Next question from moderator is, for an app working with sensitive data, what solution would you recommend if I need to show a login screen every time the app comes from the background? Related to that, is there an easy way to determine if your app is currently in the background?
Right. I think that this is actually a question that's come up at least once before. So there's probably, all right, so first off, to answer the question of how do you determine if your app is in the background, all Android applications have a life cycle. When they start up, you get a on start or on create callback, and then you'll get on resume, and so on and so forth, and then finally on pause, on stop. So these callbacks are what allows your app to know what its current state is, and that's pretty much the answer to your question as well too. If you want to go and display a login dialog when your app comes back up from the background, if you just want to be on first launch, you can put it in on create. If you want to make it so that it appears when it's coming back after being in the background for a while, you can put it on resume. it's just a matter of how you want to go and display this. Keep in mind that you don't want to display your login dialog too frequently, so be a bit cautious about how you do use this. Also, it's worth noting, as far as your login screen, don't go and launch that as a separate activity. There's some security implications there that you can get it right if you're careful, but it's very difficult to get right. So my recommendation there would be just to go and swap out your layout for your login form without spawning a whole new activity. But I think that should answer your question.
I was going to add something, which is that I have used apps that have encrypted data in them, and they ask you for a login screen every time you switch away from them and switch back, which is a little bit of an annoyance.
Oh, it's very annoying. To call out one app in particular, 1Password, I love the Mac version of it. The Android version drives me absolutely nuts because I log in to get my password, I switch to the browser, I enter my password, I go back to 1Password, and it's locked again, and it hasn't even been 30 seconds.
Right.
The phone already has a lock screen, so I'd say at the very least make this optional, because it's going to drive a lot of your users nuts to the point where they might switch to other apps.
Right.
Definitely don't make it mandatory. And consider that if the user really does want to keep their phone secure, they've probably already set a passcode for the screen as well.
Right. And in fairness to OnePass, I'm aware of another password app that I use, which works exactly the same way. And I think it was designed with the idea that you might leave the phone around without locking it. But I think it's better to just trust the user, that the user will know when he or she wants to lock the phone itself and not. And having to enter the password every time you go in to get a different password is a user annoyance. So that would be my comment.
Yeah, phones are much more personal devices than computers. So keep in mind, again, a lot of the security considerations you've made, you had to make on a computer that make sense in the context of a phone, because it is something a user typically carries in their pocket. And if you really, really do want to implement this, consider making it a time delay and not just an on-background delay.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. Our next question from moderator is view.getTag performance versus custom holder class for cells in a list view. I'm storing view references using view.setTag, find view by ID, and then retrieving via view.getTag. Simpler and less static. I'm not really sure what that means.
All right. Well, I mean, I'll add you haven't used this for grid view, which behaves pretty much similar to list view. There's really no harm in using set tag and get tag. I mean, it's there for you to go and store your custom data, whatever that might be. So if you find that's an appropriate place to put metadata, references to objects using, etc., that's perfectly fine. Just keep in mind though that your list view cells do get reused. But as long as you keep that in mind, where you decide to put your data doesn't really make a difference.
I'm trying to figure out what he means by versus custom holder. I like assuming that means something like a external hash table keyed off of the row ID or something like that. One thing that you would run into where view.setTag would be a much better option is that, as Trevor was saying, the views get recycled. So if you were using like an external hash table or something like that, you could have 100 entries in there with the view stored in there when you only really need like 7, and that situation would sort of take care of itself if you just use the view.setTag.
All right.
Okay.
Cool. Next question
Great.
then.
Thank you very much, Alex. The next question is from moderator again. With GCM, will there be any third-party social servers available for us to use? As otherwise stuff like Twitter push is difficult and pricey to implement. I'm not really sure what's meant by third-party social servers, but I'll let Francesco.
The answer is no. Google Cloud Messaging is a messaging service, which means that your server can send messages to the cloud, so we deliver it to the device, but we don't provide any kind of extra feature like bringing down social messages or whatever. some developers could create a third-party service that other users could use, but it's not Google.
So the one thing that might be worth mentioning there, one of the new features we did add in GCM is you can actually have multiple API keys associated with a single application. So as a completely hypothetical example, if Twitter wanted to go and push messages directly to your app, they could go and give you their own API key. You could add that as an authorized key for your app, and then Twitter would be authorized to send directly into your app. Right now, I'm not aware of any social services that do that. But the functionality is there, so if anybody does want to go and build that out, the backend's already in place for that. I got that right?
Yes.
Cool.
Great. Thank you very much, Trevor.
We have a question on the Hangouts from Matthew.
Okay, go ahead, Matthew. Hello?
Hello, this is Matt. I had a question on basically the ADB tool. When installing devices onto an emulator, we're using code that's either generated by ASM, not necessarily just compiled in Java. And to get errors like DexOpt failed or failed UID changed, I'm trying to find if there's a way I can find a general area that just lists kind of where to go when you encounter those types of errors. I know what they mean, but I'm assuming DexOpt is kind of like a Java lang verify error, but with much less details.
Yeah, I'd say, our documentation there is somewhat sparse, partly because, most of the time people don't interact with those tools directly. Anything that would cause those errors is normally caught at an early level by the compiler and such. If you are going and trying to do your own custom build, the chances of running into those are a bit greater. So unfortunately, like I said, not much documentation there, at least on the Android developer site. Probably a good resource would be the Android developers mailing list. A lot of us on the Android team within Google do keep an eye on that. So there's members of the framework team, members of the build tools team. We all stop in there every now and then. And so if you do run into any of the more complicated errors like that, you can just go ahead and ask us directly. Certainly not as good as having documentation, but it's probably the next best thing.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, let's. Do we have anything else on? Okay, my producer says no, so let's move to moderator. I implemented a simple app to push notifications to my phone, but I ran into a problem. Boolean entries in the JSON sent to the GCM server were converted into strings in the intent extras. Is that a bug or a technical limitation?
It's more like a technical limitation. So GCM, we opened the JSON protocol in GCM only, but we want to be able for you guys to use GCM on the very first release of push messaging, which happened in Froyo devices. Now, Froyo devices, when we used C2DM for them, they accepted only plain text in which every parameter was a string. So we send down to the device only string parameters, like is a key value pair in which every single value is represented as a string. So when we opened the JSON interface, we had to convert into strings. What we are thinking about is maybe force the JSON to have only parameters with strings.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesco. Next question from moderator. Is it possible that daily device installs also counts existing devices that got a software update to a new Android version? On a certain day, I had 80 user installs and 450 device installs, and there was a spike on 4.03-4.04 device installs that day.
Okay. So Google Play does make a distinction between... actually, hey, Rado, do you want to switch cameras? Yeah. Google Play does make a distinction between new installs versus upgrades. So as far as the data we're logging, we definitely do know the difference between the two of them. I'm certainly not going to rule off the possibility that there's a bug in our logging pipeline. But to my knowledge, assuming everything is working the way it was designed, those installs should be different. It's entirely, it's possible too that maybe you just got a bunch of traffic from some other source and your update, made somebody notice your app. If you, maybe install something like Google Analytics, which will get you a little bit more visibility into where your users are coming from, how many unique users you have. That might help distinguish between the two of those. I've certainly never heard of updates being counted as new installs, so I'm really inclined to think that actually those are new installs for some reason with your app. So, like I said, give Google Analytics a try, see if that helps. At least distinguish where those users are coming from. It'll tell you things like refers. Lots of really juicy stats there. All right.
Thank you, Trevor.
Yeah, I just realized I stole Alex's thunder. He's the analytics guy.
It's all right. I'm just glad more people on this team know that analytics. It's not the only one.
Great. Regarding GCM, what ports need to be opened on our server behind a firewall? Only HTTPS, which is 443, or 5228, 5229, and 5230, or all of them?
Okay, so if your server is the one that sends the messages and is the only piece that you want to use for GCM in this case, and then the port 443 is the only one you need. But if you have devices that needs to receive messages, then the port you want to open in your firewall is 5228, and which is enough for now, but you might want to open as well 5229, 5230, because we might use those in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Next question off of moderator. Are there docs coming up for using Create App Engine Backends option in GPE? There was a great talk in Google I/O about the same thing, but until now no docs have been released. When I click Google Create App Engine Backend, it exits with an error.
I can take a shot at this. I'm assuming that you're referring to the Create App Engine backend for an Android application, and you haven't just randomly put an App Engine question in an unrelated Android talk. That plugin, that particular function uses C2DM to communicate back down to the Android device. And given that C2DM is now deprecated, I'm not actually sure what the future of that plugin is off the top of my head. I can look into it. But for the time being, I know that there are documents. If you already have a C2DM account, there is documentation up. There is the GBE plugin has its own page that you can look at. There's also a page up on Android training. And I can't really say anything about the error you're seeing without knowing what the actual error is.
As general guidance, when you guys do see an error and you want to ask us, it helps if you actually tell us what the error is. But yeah, I mean, more generally, just talking about the plugin. I'm not aware of any plans to deprecate it. I think if something isn't working, I think that's just a legitimate bug. Please file a bug report, and we'll look into it. In general, b.android.com is the Android bug tracker. Or of course, leave a comment here with additional information. But again, we do need to know the actual error. All right, Joe.
Great. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Next question is, are you planning on selling the ADK 2012 at some point in time for those who couldn't make I/O? If not, what would you say is the next best alternative? Go ahead, Trevor.
All right. So right now, I'm not aware of any plans to have Google selling the ADK, the ADK version 2 directly. That being said, we have published all of the schematics and in various board layout files online. So anybody who does want to go and make one, everything is open source. I want to say it's Creative Commons. Don't quote me on that. Check the license associated with it. But it is released under a permissive license. So anybody who does want to actually go and manufacture more of these boards, just go ahead, download them from our website, and at some point in the future, I suspect you'll actually see some on the market from somebody who's not Google, who's actually gone and reproduced them. They do take, if for those of you who haven't seen it, it's actually a really cool design. They took the ADK and built this really neat touch-sensitive alarm clock around it. And then when you actually want to go and build it, you actually pop it open, it has some magnets, and rip the ADK out of it. It's really cool, but it's also a lot of work to build. So I think it'll probably take a little bit before people actually release the exact same ADK. That being said, I'm sure you'll also see some non-alarm clock ADKs for sale as well too, for somebody who just wants a simpler hardware platform to go and build on top of.
Yeah. I just want to add the 80K that we gave away last year was followed up within a couple months by several third parties writing their own 80Ks and selling their own 80Ks, and many of them were more impressive than the one that we gave away. So I wouldn't worry too much about getting your hands on one of the ones that we gave away at I/O. Just go to the website and sort of keep your ears open, like check out like Maker Faire type communities, and more awesome stuff that's better than what we gave away will probably be coming down the pipe.
Good answers. Thank you very much. So let's go down here to the next moderator question, and this is going to be one that Francesco can answer. Why are GCM multicast messages restricted to 1,000 registration IDs?
As opposed to 1001. No, it's actually a good question. Well, the API is a multicast messaging, which means it's not broadcast, which means you don't want to send the message to everybody. So we had to come up with a number. Now, the number is 1,000 is kind of the maximum we wanted to go at the beginning, because we see spikes. So every time we receive messages, we can have like a sort of a QPS, right? In C2DM, we had like a very nice curve of QPS, but now we can have spikes of people sending like 1,000 messages in one request, which is very difficult to allocate for our resources. We wanted to give this kind of API because it's good for our developers to be able to, in one request, address multiple devices, but we had to come up with a number, and this number was 1,000.
Okay, that's a good enough answer, I think.
I hope.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. If not, if you've got any other information that causes you to ask this, we'd be interested in hearing it. Meanwhile, we'll move on to the next question. I have knowledge of Android SDK, Android tools, Jenkins, Ant, Miavan, XML, and JSON.
I think they mean Maven.
Maven. Okay, yeah, that's probably true. Didn't think about that. What else does an Android developer need to know to enhance his or her technical skills?
Everything.
Yeah,
All the things.
that's quite the question there.
Yeah, I would say one thing I do notice missing from the list is SQL, and for persistent storage, we use a SQLite database. So I would throw that on the list of things to cover. Other than that is quite a broad question.
Yeah, OpenGL would be a very good topic to learn, just because at some point you'll probably want to do something 3D, if not, a full-fledged 3D game. Maybe you'll just want to go and build some effects into your application. OpenGL tends to be a very good tool for that. In addition, just general computer graphics, right? If OpenGL doesn't do what you need to do, you're going to be stuck with something like a canvas, and knowing how to actually go and do things efficiently in that context is a good skill. More broadly speaking, you're going to want to know how to do things with web services, so understanding concepts like REST, OAuth, things like that, very useful to know. Really, it's a very broad question here. I could just go down the list all day. But yeah, I'd say you've already got a pretty strong foundation there. It really depends on what it is you want to build, right? I mentioned OpenGL. Maybe that has no bearing on your app. I don't know. I don't know what you want to do. But I'd say you already have a pretty strong technical foundation with what you've listed.
I would certainly agree with that. I would also say that there's really no end to the answer, because you can't ever tell what you're going to need to know. A lot of it, to my mind, depends on what you're trying to accomplish. If you are trying to get a position someplace with a company that's doing something in particular, then I would look at what that company is doing, what type of application space it's in. If it's very data oriented, you probably want to look at something like SQL, or you may want to look at statistics and learn something about how statistics and analytics are done in this space. On the other hand, if you want to be a contractor and independent developer, one of the things you're probably going to have to do is decide on what's most in demand and then focus on those areas. And you may have to sort of pick up technical skills along the way as you're doing a contract. There's no way to say that you're ever finished with learning stuff. That's certainly true.
I think that's a pretty good answer.
Yeah. I mean, Trevor covered a lot of the things that I would have covered, especially OpenGL. I think that's a really good answer. So let's move on. Is there a rough estimate for when C2DM will be turned off? And I think we've got the expert here that may be able to give us an answer.
So C2DM is deprecated, which means we don't accept any more signups nor quota requests. We do not want to break your application, so we will give, if we will ever turn the services down, we will give heads up way ahead of time, like at least a year before we decide to do so. This said, I would urge you to migrate to the new system before you run into quota issues, or if you need to use new APIs, or if the client login, which is being deprecated, will actually be deprecated.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on that, whenever we deprecate an API, it is a good idea to go and take a look for alternatives, and the alternative in this case would be GCM, and to move there as quickly as you can. Again, we don't want to break your app. It's not going to disappear anytime in the near future. You do have time to do a nice orderly migration, but please don't wait to migrate until we actually say that the servers are going away, because by then you'll be in a rush. Start your migration to GCM now, and then you'll be in good shape for when they do eventually get turned off in the future.
Great, thank you. Next question. Okay, if we thought the one before was open-ended. I'm trying to learn Java. Can you recommend some books or videos, etc.?
Right. I'm sure we're all going to have opinions on this one, but I'm going to take a start. The part that you didn't give us that's really important is, are you an experienced or intermediate programmer who just hasn't been exposed to Java yet, or are you not used to programming? If you're already familiar with programming, I got a lot of value out of a book called Core Java, and also one, I'm blanking on the name, maybe you guys can help, by Josh Block. It had a lot of really good design patterns.
Effective Java.
Effective Java. Thank you, Joe. Really good book, but difficult to digest if you are not already familiar with programming. If you're a new programmer, it's been I'm pretty sure pretty close to a decade since any of us have been new to programming. So if we knew good resources a decade ago, they're out of date by now. Anyone else want to take a crack at this?
Yeah, I'm actually going to take a opposing stance here and say that I've hated every Java book I've ever read. That being said, there's some amazing tutorials online. So, what used to be the Sun website is now the Oracle website. They have a lot of Java tutorials there. All of them are actually really well written. I can't recommend them highly enough. So you go take a look at those, perhaps. They have most of them are in tutorial format. They're written by the guys who did a lot of the initial work on the Java language. So that'd be my recommendation. Also, if you are going to branch out into Android, I can recommend a very good Android book, which would be the one written by the guy sitting on the other end of the camera right now, Rado Meyer. It's Android for application development, and he's not on camera, so he can't really speak to it. But I'll give him my recommendation from this side of the camera.
And I would agree with Trevor's recommendation. I would also say that the books and videos and everything is going to depend a lot on where you're coming from. If you've done programming and you're coming from another language, you may want to take a look at books out there that I'm sure there is some book that is like Java programming for C programmers or something like that. And if you just Google that, you may find something that will help you. If you are not familiar with object-oriented programming, then you may want to look at something that's a little bit more elementary that covers that as well as Java from the point of view of somebody just starting out. I happen to have a book called Java in a Nutshell, which is an O'Reilly book, and the reason I have it is that it does cover. It is a good introduction in the sense that it takes you from very simple to very complex, but it's also a really great reference. So since I can't claim to be a Java expert, I always have it sitting around in case I need to look up something, which I find very easy to do in that particular book. The only other thing I can think of is that a lot of things these days are discussed in terms of general terminology for computer science related to programming languages. So you may want to look at books that are just in general about object-oriented programming and design patterns. I sometimes read a book called Design Patterns, which is at least a decade old, if not 20 years old at this point, but it's a good summary, unfortunately in C++ rather than Java, of the standard algorithms and design patterns for creating things in any programming language, and that's worth having on your bookshelf.
All right. And actually, Francesco, since you're a guest today,
Right.
What's your opinion? Was there any books or anything you found particularly good when you were starting out learning Java for the first time?
I learned Java when I was in Italy, and the books' titles are different. My opinion is, if you are new to programming language, I would not start with the language itself. I would start learning patterns, algorithms, as suggested, because you can build up the foundation of programming skills, which will help you then pick up a language, which is Java, C, or Python, or whatever, much quicker and faster. And then, I have a bit deeper understanding of the code and the algorithm, rather than having an approach of, I know this Java library, so I'm going to use that without really understanding what's happening.
All right. Thank you very much.
Since we're on this topic that is dear to my heart, I'll say one more thing about this, which is, which is that the fastest way to learn any programming language is to set yourself a project in it. I thought I knew Java really well until I started working on Android. And then I really learned Java, because you will learn something very fast if you have to work in it every day. And if you've got a target, at least that's my way of learning. So, look at the ways that you've learned other things and follow that. If you learn out of a book, then get a book. If you learn by doing, then I would say go do something.
All right.
Okay. Let's move on. Next question is semantic zoom, as implemented in ICS Calendar, a recommended pattern to use in our own apps?
I actually don't know what semantic zoom is.
Yeah, I don't either. Sorry.
Yes. This.
Okay. I think what the question means is expanding and expanding with two-finger gesture a recommended pattern to use in your own apps.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we don't have our capture device hooked up. Otherwise, we'd actually show you what Alex just showed us. But yeah, he took 2 fingers and just was able to drag up and down, and the calendar view expanded and contracted as he did that.
Specifically, one element of the view expanded, and everything else sort of stayed the same, which I assume is what they mean by semantic zoom. A recommended pattern. I don't think it's an official recommendation at this point. I would check the Android design guide for that. But it looks neat, and if it and if I think it improves usability, at least for the calendar app. So it's definitely not a discouraged pattern. But I don't think it's an official pattern yet either. It's just it's a neat thing that's out there.
I can answer specifically for something I do know about notifications. In Jelly Bean, notifications implement that feature as part of the API now. Notifications at least used to be what we call 1U, which is a height of about, I think it's 64 dp. But now we feature an expanded notification. If you do a gesture like stretching the boundaries of the notification apart or some other gestures, you'll expand it to what's called a 4U notification with a lot more space. It's 256 dp, and that's sort of a zoom what I would call a multi-touch zoom, and that's an official part of notification UI at this point, so it's worth looking into.
Yep. On the broader topic of UI design patterns, I mean, there's certainly a lot of stuff that we try that we think looks really cool or greatly improves the usability of the system. Hopefully, the two at the same time. And we give those a try in our own apps. We're a bit more conservative with the official design guidelines, because once we write something down there, it's more or less set in stone, right? I mean, developers go and they build up their apps using those patterns. So you want to make sure that anything we actually go and write down is something that we're really happy with. I think that this particular pattern that was mentioned in the question is not actually been added to our standard or UI guidelines, as Alex mentioned. If you want to go and be on the bleeding edge, by all means, try and make your app look like the system. I think it's a very good goal. I think you can't go wrong. That being said, don't be surprised if in the next release some of these things change out from underneath you. It's just like using undocumented APIs, right? These things are still in flux. But actually, I take that back. It's not as bad as using an undocumented API. That's a horrible thing. Don't ever do it. But no, I don't think you can go wrong in this case if you just want to make something that looks like the system. Just keep an eye out when what comes after when the K release comes out, whatever that happens to be called. Make sure that behavior hasn't changed.
I would also add that this is a shiny, visually appealing feature. That doesn't necessarily mean it's appropriate all the time. In general, I agree with Trevor that if you want to look like the system, you can't really go wrong. But we also put a lot of effort into making, visually appealing little effects like that where appropriate.
That's true. Yeah, there is a guideline that you want to have lots of playful visual flourishes. It makes your app feel more alive. It makes your users happy. So even if things aren't necessarily documented as official patterns, if it makes sense in the context of your app and follows the spirit of the system, it's the overarching goal there is something we have written down.
I was actually more referring to, in general, I agree. I was more referring to being cautious when using a feature like that. Don't set up a text view where you use that feature and expand one word so it overlaps all the other words, because that would be.
Oh yeah, you have to make sure you have to make sure it's usable. You have to make sure it actually makes sense. Absolutely. Exactly. But at the same time, having something that is usable and makes sense but is fun is a good thing. Case in point, Google Plus, right? When I get a event invitation, it sort of folds out like an actual event card, like a little piece of paper unraveling, and it has no practical use, but it looks cool and it makes people happy, and it doesn't hurt usability at the very least. It actually might even help because it helps explain what's going on.
Right. I would add that some of these things are sort of subtle, but they're force multipliers. That means that you have immediate ability to look at information in depth and take action without having to go to another activity or application. So for instance, in notifications, you can click buttons and look at more than one email message. That's a force multiplier, because what it means is you're not forcing the user to go into email to look at what's going on, or go into a music player or a chat system. They can look at it right from the notifications. They can look at a calendar event in detail without having to switch to a separate activity to look at it. And that's very powerful. It makes things look, it's easy to use, but it means that there's less work for the user.
Well said. I like that.
I have to give credit to Daniel Sandler for that. Yes, go ahead.
I've got a question from the invite screen. Jas would like to know, can you use Content Observer for monitoring a database instead of Content Provider? If not, can you suggest ways of monitoring a database?
Oh, this
content provider?
Yes, so I'm assuming he means
right.
like an SQLite database directly rather than
Right. So the question was, can you use Content Observer instead of Content Provider to monitor a database? And if not, can you suggest another way of monitoring a database? And this sounds like a familiar question. I think we've discussed this before. If not officially in developer office hours amongst ourselves. I'm not sure what the answer is. Anybody got an idea?
I mean, as far as the specifics of Content Observer versus Content Provider, unfortunately, I don't know the answer off the top of my head either. It's I'm drawing a blank. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly more than one way to go and read data out of a database. At the end, it's all going to boil down to a SQL statement somewhere. It's just what design pattern do you use to go and retrieve that data and make it accessible to everything else. Rado, you literally wrote the book on this. So what's your thoughts?
I think the key here that he's asking is specifically, so content observer is what you use if you want to be able to monitor a database for changes. So
If you want a content observer monitors a cursor.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So his question is, can you use it to monitor a cursor from a database rather than from a content provider?
As far as I know, you should be able to. I don't think
A cursor is a cursor.
Yeah, a cursor is a cursor, and content observer. There's an observer on cursors that I think is independent of content providers.
That's my understanding as well, but I haven't looked at it closely. So
Right. The easy answer is look in cursor, and if cursor has a set content observer method on it, then you can do it, because that's how you would do it, is set a content observer for a cursor that comes from a database. I mean, a content provider, all that it really does for SQL databases is encapsulate an SQLite database, and the SQLite database returns a cursor, and the content provider returns that cursor to the calling component. So really, that's all the difference that there is. There's nothing magic about a content provider that automatically does an observation.
thank you, Joe.
Anybody else? Okay.
Yeah. So this is actually probably a good time to mention that we have about 15 minutes left. So if
thank you.
anybody does want to go and ask us any live questions, please jump into our Hangout. We'd be happy to have you on the air. Even if your mic doesn't work, feel free to hop on anyway, and you can go ahead and type your question out to us, and we can go ahead and ask our panel of experts here in the room. GCM questions or just Android questions in general, we're happy to take any of them.
And
That's a good point.
Keeping an eye on the Google Plus event live stream as well. So if you have any questions, you can drop them in there. One of
Great.
which is from Milesh, who asks, is it a good idea to have two different versions of the ADT plugin and SDK tools running two separate builds? E.g., SVN trunk could be running on ADT 20 and SDK 20 tools, and branch could be running ADT 15 and SDK 15 tools. Are there any issues with this?
Okay, so the question is it a good idea to run separate versions of ADT on separate builds? And the answer is, my answer would be, you certainly can't do it in the same version of Eclipse, because those are plugins, and I don't think you can have more than one ADT plugin in the same version of Eclipse. You certainly would run into problems. But if you want to have more than one instance of Eclipse on your system, then you should be able to do it.
Yeah, well, there is one problem I can see with all of this. And, I mean, so the goal here is not only to have different versions of ADT, but also different versions of the Android framework running too, correct?
Right.
So in that case, there are different versions of ADB server, and the different versions of the framework are going to try and launch different versions of ADB server, and that's going to cause conflicts. So I think even if you're running your different versions of the SDK inside of different versions of ADT inside of different versions of Eclipse, at the end of the day, you can only have one version of ADB server running, and that's where you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, that is a good point. You'd probably have to do a lot of fiddling around with path variables and environment variables in order to get it to work correctly. It's probably not worth doing. I would think that probably what you want to do, if you're just trying to aim at different platforms, is set up for the highest level platform, and then you can always aim to a lower API if you want to check for API compatibility.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add one additional data point here. Here in the Android team, we work with a lot of different versions of the Android framework, and I have never installed more than one copy of ADT. So I think that's not the right approach here. I think the right approach, have one version of the SDK tools, one version of ADT, and like Joe said, just go ahead and switch what your build targets are, and that's a perfectly supported workflow.
Great, thank you. Next question from moderator. Google Maps home to work feature, is there an API available for developers to access this data, intents or a provider or something? I'm researching location tracking for my app. I don't know exactly what the question means, but I assume that the respondent means the thing that tells you how long it's going to take you to get from your home to work and vice versa?
Right, I think so too, which I believe actually was something. I think that's part of the whole latitude umbrella, right? Where it's actually going and keeping track of where you
Right.
are and reporting it to your friends, and then building a location service on top of that. The answer, to my knowledge, is no. We don't have an API for that. We do have Location Manager. You can get both fine-grained GPS location data as well as the coarser-grained Wi-Fi based data as well. But we don't actually have the APIs to say where's my detected home, where's my detected work, etc.
I would say actually, if there is an API for that, we're the wrong ones to ask, because we don't run, or we don't write Latitude or Google Maps. I believe Maps API has their own office hours. That would be the right place to ask.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the current V1 version of the Maps API for Android, and I don't think that it has anything like this in it.
No, it doesn't.
But there's also, I think this is not a feature of that component. I think this is more a feature of the Maps app and the Latitude API, the Latitude app, and I don't think that they have APIs available. So, go ahead.
There is a Latitude API, I think. I don't
Is there?
There is a Latitude API, but
Ah.
I think it's more for just reporting what your location is. I don't
see.
think,
Okay.
at least the last time I looked at it, which admittedly was quite a while ago, it didn't have anything to go and get your auto-detected home and work locations.
Okay. Well, I stand corrected, which is pretty much par for the course today.
Well, no. The answer is there's no API for this.
Right. The answer for this particular question is there is no API. Sorry. If you've got any more particular questions, you can send them in to us or call, get online and talk to us about it. There may be something that we're missing. I feel like there's more to this question that we haven't answered, so I just want to leave that open. The next question from moderator is, I'm using the following function to get all view IDs versus calling find view by ID multiple times, which does a very similar traversal. And he has it in a link. I'm guessing this is faster if you have a high ID versus non-ID view group. Unfortunately, I don't have offhand the link available. Let me go look in the link and see if it's getting a redirect. So he has a something called a create resource map.
Okay, he's literally just iterating through all of the children inside of a view group.
Right.
And then, creates this resource map, which is, I'm not sure what data structure that is there.
I can't tell offhand, but I think what he's just
Oh,
doing
here
is-
you go. He's actually, all right, if resource ID is not equal to view.noid, and then he says, all right.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I mean, honestly, I think you're overthinking things a bit. Find view by ID is normally the right way to do this, and unless you're seeing, actual concrete performance problems, which you can use by, you can find that out by using your profiling tools, things like trace view. Unless you're actually seeing a negative performance hit there, I'd say this is probably a case of premature optimization. This seems like going a bit overboard to me. I've never seen anyone go out of their way to go in and scan through scan through all your child views like that. Seems a little off. But that being said, I'm not going to discount the possibility that it might be more, it might be faster in certain situations. It really does depend on how you're using it. But again, unless you're seeing a performance impact, it seems like code you might not even need to worry about.
I would say if you are seeing a performance impact, and that's actually making it faster, the only way I could see that being true is if your view hierarchy is so complicated and nested that you have much bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, if you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of views that you're trying to call find view by ID on, I'm really terrified to think what your view hierarchy actually looks like. That's
If it's
you're going to spend more time rendering than you're going to spend searching.
right.
Okay, let's move on here. How does the tablet layout of Google Play manage to display two pages at once when you scroll over to the categories section of the view pager.
I don't have a tablet on hand.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by display 2 pages at once. I suspect they've just gone and created a view that displays both sets of information at once. It could be done using fragments. That's the sort of thing that they're designed to be very good at, and you can certainly stick fragments inside of a view pager. So I think that's the answer. The magic of fragments.
Okay, thank you. Next question from moderator. Do you have any plans on integrating Facebook or Twitter in Android as Apple did with Twitter?
No comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, this falls under the category of we don't disclose roadmap, and this
Right.
would be a huge roadmap question.
Yeah. Is our TARDIS fixed by any chance?
Nope.
All right.
I don't
Yeah.
think
We
it is. So
can't.
the
Yeah.
time machine is not working. We can't tell you about things that we may or may not do in the future.
Yeah. It's stuck on the shelf, not moving anywhere.
Right.
Sometimes it has cookies inside, but.
Okay, next question. Does the remote control client API only support the flag key media next, flag key media pause, and flag key media previous controls? Other flags do not seem to show up.
Without looking at that API on the
Yeah.
top of my head, I'm not sure any of us know the answer. I'm not sure what you mean by don't show up either. Do you mean it doesn't work, or it's not on the documents, or not on the documentation?
I think he probably means that it's not visible on the lock screen. So you just have previous and playforce.
Well, if they don't show up, that's probably a good indication they don't work.
Yeah. Okay. Since we're getting low on time, we'll move on. I'm looking for a way to overlay a drop shadow on a scroll view as described here with a link. How can I overlay a drop shadow onto a scroll view? Is this possible? It looks as if the holo.light action bar does the same. Any answers? Or you were waiting for
I was
me to
waiting for the
open?
link, but
Okay.
I'm not sure I actually know the answer, having never tried to overlay a shadow on top of a scroll view.
So I think that what he's trying to, it shows sort of a layout, and he's trying to put a drop shadow on top of something that's in the details. My intention to has another layout above and outside the scroll view that stays at the top while scrolling the content of the scroll view. The scroll view should have a drop shadow overlay at the top, which appears to be from the layout above.
Well, you certainly can place views on top of other views.
Right.
There is an implied Z order, and I think depending on which type of layout manager you're using,
I
sometimes
see.
you can even specify the Z order if I remember correctly. But yeah, if that's the case, then just create a shadow as a drawable with an alpha layer, and problem solved. Short of that, I mean, there are other things you can do to try and fake that, but I'm not thinking of anything that will work really well in the case of a scroll view. Actually, no, there is a what's the word I'm looking for? Like a heading section on scroll views where you can actually go and normally it's designed to go and have a title for your scroll view, but you could put a drawable in there to put your shadow as well. That's a hack, but it'll work.
Well, yeah, it's not, I mean, from what I'm looking at here, it's not really clear to me whether he's trying to put the drop shadow on the scroll view or on the title above the scroll view. So I can't really tell.
Well, if you're putting on the title above the scroll view, that's even easier. Then you just place a drawable at the bottom. The only thing that makes the scroll view difficult is it's going to move.
Drop shadow.
But
overlay.
I think assuming you're putting your whatever your green box here is on top of your scroll view, just taking advantage of Z order is probably the easiest option.
I think that's a good answer. Okay, let's see if we can move on. Next question is, sorry. Yeah. Okay, we're going to have to make this the last question, my producer tells me. So how can I notify each fragment in a view pager which is linked to a tab host to refresh its view data following the load or finishing in the main activity?
The view pager is linked to a tab host.
Yeah. How can I notify each fragment in a view pager linked to a tab host to refresh its view data following a load or finishing in the main activity?
Alright. Well, I mean, generally speaking, the way you want to go and communicate with fragments is using, define an interface and just make a call to all of your fragments. Then have your fragments go and update what's inside of them. I usually recommend against reaching inside of fragments to go and try and manipulate whatever view components are inside of it, because then you're breaking encapsulation. The idea with a fragment is you can go and swap it out with other fragments as needed, and it is portable. Once you go and start modifying the contents of fragments, you've broken that portability. So short answer: send a message to your fragment and have the fragment update itself. Anybody else have any insight on that?
No, he has posted a large set of code on Stack Overflow that we could take a look at in more detail, but
Probably not in the 30 seconds or so we have left.
yeah, unfortunately, sorry.
Lightning round.
Sorry, we're out of time. But we are out of time, and we'll have to take a look at it in Stack Overflow, and hopefully somebody else can step in and take a look at it as well. I encourage everybody else in the Android developer world to go to Stack Overflow, take a look at this question, see if you've got any ideas about what's going on.
That's a lot of people.
Yes. Crowdsourcing the answer. And on that note, I think we're done for today. I want to thank Francesco for showing up and answering GCM questions.
Thank you, guys.
And Trevor and Alex for supporting me, and Rado for running all the equipment to bring us to you. And on that note,
All right.
goodbye.
See
folks.
everyone.